I pulled into my driveway after a grueling day at court, desperate to unwind in the sanctuary of my home. The thought of sinking into my recliner with a glass of bourbon and a good book had been the only thing keeping me grounded through the endless stream of property dispute cases I'd overseen. But as I reached for the garage remote, something odd caught my eye. The lights inside were on. My car should have been the only one in the driveway, yet there sat a sleek silver sedan where I usually parked. A cold unease twisted in my gut. At first, I thought I'd misjudged. Maybe a neighbor had parked in the wrong spot, or a delivery driver had mixed up addresses. But when I approached the front door, my key wouldn't turn in the lock. That's when the truth hit me like a sledgehammer. I knocked, heart racing. A middle-aged man in a bathrobe, cradling a steaming mug of coffee, opened the door as if he'd lived there forever. He gave me a puzzled look, then a slow, condescending smile. "Can I help you?" he asked, like I was the intruder. I stared at him. "I think you're in the wrong house." He chuckled and shook his head. "Nope. Bought it last week. Got a steal at the HOA auction." My vision blurred with rage. My hands balled into fists, a fire igniting in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. "This is my house," I said, voice steady but sharp. "I never put it up for sale." He gave me a pitying look. "I'm sorry, but that's not what the HOA said. You had unpaid fees, so they foreclosed and sold it." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. This had to be a mistake, an absurd, ridiculous mistake. I pulled out my phone and dialed the HOA office, pacing the porch as the new occupant sipped his coffee, utterly unfazed. A woman picked up on the second ring. "Pinewood HOA, how can I assist you?" "This is Judge Michael Reed," I snapped. "I just got home to find my house, my legally owned, fully paid-for house, has been sold. I need an explanation now." There was a pause, then a practiced politeness. "Oh, Mr. Reed, yes. I see here your home was foreclosed due to unpaid HOA fees." "I've never missed a payment," I said through gritted teeth. "Not once." "Well, our records say otherwise. Perhaps you missed a fine." Her tone wasn't just dismissive, it was smug. "Then pull up my account," I demanded. "Tell me exactly what I supposedly owe." Papers rustled, keys clicked, and she let out a fake hum. "Ah, yes. It seems you had an outstanding balance of $10. I nearly dropped my phone. $10. I repeated, voice low and dangerous. "Yes, sir. An administrative fee from last year when unpaid. Per our bylaws, any unpaid balance can lead to foreclosure after 6 months." I let out a bitter laugh. This was beyond insane. "You foreclosed on my house over $10. Rules are rules, sir." I hung up before I said something that'd get me disbarred. My jaw was clenched so tight it could have shattered stone. The bathrobe guy, my home's so-called new owner, shrugged apologetically. "Look, I don't know what to tell you. It's legal. I've got the deed. Maybe talk to the HOA, but this house is mine now." I stepped closer. He flinched back. "I'm Judge Michael Reed," I said evenly. "I specialize in HOA litigation. You've messed with the wrong person." Before he could reply, red and blue lights flooded the street. 2 police cruisers rolled up, and 3 officers stepped out. My neighbor, old Mrs. Ellis, watched from her window, jaw dropped. A tall, broad officer, badge reading Officer Daniels, approached me, eyeing me warily. "We got a report of a disturbance." I exhaled sharply, rubbing my temples. "No disturbance. I'm trying to get into my own home." Daniels glanced at bathrobe guy, who now looked smug with backup. "Sir, we have documentation showing this property was legally sold by the HOA," Daniels said. "I get that this is frustrating, but you'll need to take it up with them." "You expect me to just leave?" "Yes, sir," he said firmly. "Otherwise, we'll have to escort you off the premises." I stared at him, incredulous. "You're telling me my house was stolen, and you're siding with the thieves?" "Sir, if you don't leave, we'll consider it trespassing." I'd never wanted to punch someone so badly, but I forced myself to stay composed. A judge getting arrested wouldn't help. "This isn't over," I told bathrobe guy, who smirked like he'd hit the jackpot. "Not by a long shot." I walked away, feeling my neighbor's stares, my hands trembling, not from fear, but from pure fury. The HOA thought they'd pulled a fast one, stealing my home over $10 to line their pockets. They had no idea who they'd just crossed. By the time I reached my car, a plan was forming. I'd bring them down, for me, and every homeowner they'd ever scammed. I sat in my car outside the HOA office, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened. The nerve of these people, to think they could get away with this. I stepped out, straightened my tie, and marched inside. The modest building oozed fake professionalism, more like a shady car lot than an office. The receptionist looked up with a syrupy smile. "Can I help you?" "I need to see Paul Grayson," I said. Her smile faltered. "Mr. Grayson's in a meeting," then interrupt him. I cut in. "Tell him Judge Michael Reed is here about the illegal sale of my home." That did it. She fumbled with her phone, muttering into it. Moments later, a door swung open, and out waddled Paul Grayson, the HOA president, a short, plump man with a receding hairline and an oversized suit. He oozed the confidence of someone who thought he was untouchable. "Mr. Reed," he said with a tight smile, "what a surprise." "Not as surprising as finding out my house was sold out from under me," I replied. "We need to talk." He gestured to his office, and I stepped inside. It was cluttered with cheap plaques, photos of him shaking hands with local bigwigs, and a desk buried in papers. He sat with an exaggerated sigh. "I'm sure this is frustrating for you." "Your book," I said, eyes narrowing. "Not the law." He smirked. "The HOA has its own regulations. Homeowners agree to them when they buy in. If fees aren't paid, properties can be foreclosed." $10, I said sharply. "You're saying my home was sold over a $10 fee?" He shrugged. "You should have paid it." I leaned forward. "You know that fee was fake. I never got a notice or a chance to dispute it. This was a setup." Paul chuckled. "File a lawsuit if you feel wronged. Our legal team's unbeatable." I studied him, my anger simmering. He thought this was a game, that I'd back down like the others. "You've done this before, haven't you?" I said. "Stealing homes with shady loopholes." His smirk didn't waver. "The HOA ensures the community stays in good hands." I stood, smoothing my jacket. "Enjoy your power while it lasts, Paul. I'm about to burn your corrupt little empire to the ground." His smirk twitched, but he recovered. "Good luck, Judge." I left, mind racing. To take them down, I needed proof, not just of my case, but of every scam they'd pulled. My first stop was Mrs. Ellis, a widow who'd lived here for decades. She opened her door cautiously. "Michael," she said, concerned, "I heard what happened. It's awful. Has the HOA ever fined you for something absurd?" I asked. She sighed. "Oh, all the time. They once charged me $500 for the wrong shade of blue on my shutters. I repainted it twice to satisfy them." "And foreclosure?" Her lips thinned. "Not me, but the Wilsons lost their home last year over an unpaid maintenance fee. They fought it in court and lost. The HOA always wins." That confirmed it. This was a pattern, a legalized extortion racket masked as community management. I spent the day talking to homeowners, hearing the same tales. Families losing homes over petty fines, fees popping up out of nowhere, properties auctioned off cheap to HOA insiders. This was fraud, plain and simple. I needed a paper trail, financial records proving their crimes. That meant digging deep. I called an old friend, Tom Carver, an investigative journalist who thrived on exposing corruption. When I explained the situation, he was hooked. "HOA fraud," he said. "That's a goldmine. If we can prove an illegal foreclosure scheme, this'll explode." "That's the goal," I said. "But I need documents, proof of fake fees, shady sales, anything linking them to fraud." Tom hummed. "I've got a contact at the county recorder's office. They've got all property transfers. If there's a pattern, we'll find it." "Perfect. If we could show they targeted homeowners with fabricated fines and sold to their cronies, they'd be finished." Tom started digging while I planned my next move. They'd never faced someone who knew the system like I did. Sitting on the stiff motel bed, the cheap, dingy room I was now stuck in, I pored over the file Tom had snagged from the county. It was worse than I'd thought. The HOA had been running this con for years, and they weren't subtle. Pages listed homes foreclosed and sold under sketchy circumstances, always auctioned below value, often to buyers tied to the HOA board. It wasn't just corruption, it was a criminal racket. I ran a hand through my hair, exhaling. Exposing this was one thing. Making it stick in court was another. I needed intent. Mistakes could be excused, but deliberate fraud? That was jail time. I'd prove it. The homeowners I'd spoken to all got vague notices about minor fees they'd never heard of. If those were fake, I'd have them. I needed more, so I went to the source. The next morning, I parked down the street from the HOA office, watching employees trickle in. Paul Grayson arrived last, stepping from his sleek black sedan with the swagger of a man who thought he was invincible. He strolled inside, oblivious to the storm coming. I waited until the office buzzed with activity, then walked in like I belonged. The receptionist barely glanced up as I headed to the back. HOAs loved paper trails, everything documented to fake legitimacy. If forged records existed, they'd be in the archives. Luck struck. A junior staffer had left a filing cabinet ajar. Inside were stacks of foreclosure notices. I pulled a few, names I knew, families who'd lost homes. Each showed the same pattern: minor fees, vague notices, foreclosure. The signatures on the approval forms didn't match. Someone had been forging them. A voice froze me. Looking for something? I turned slowly. A woman stood in the doorway, mid-40s, sharp eyes, suspicious. Her nameplate read Ellen Brooks, HOA treasurer. Of course, the money handler. I smiled. Just checking if my case was documented right. She didn't smile. That's confidential. So is fraud, I said, sliding the file back. But that hasn't stopped this office. Her eyes narrowed. You're the judge, aren't you? The one making trouble. Trouble? I laughed shortly. Is that what you call stealing homes? She stepped closer. You don't know what you're messing with. I tilted my head. I think I do. But maybe you can enlighten me. She glanced down the hall, then back. You should leave. Not without what I need. A beat of silence. Then she exhaled. Meet me tonight. Grocery store parking lot, 9 o'clock. Before I could reply, she walked off. At 9 o'clock sharp, I pulled into the dark lot, headlights off. Ellen sat in an old sedan, fingers tapping the wheel. I approached. She cracked the window. I shouldn't be doing this, she muttered. But you are, I said. Which means you know this is rotten. She sighed. I didn't sign up for this. It was supposed to be simple, manage funds, budgets. Then Paul started pushing foreclosures. I thought they were legit at first, but then I saw discrepancies. Fake fines. I asked. She nodded. We bill homeowners for minor stuff they didn't know about. Fees piled up on paper until we could seize the property. Then the auctions, rigged sales to insiders. I know, I said. Paul's pocketing the cash. Her fists clenched. I questioned it once. He told me to shut up, or I'd be out. Why talk now? She hesitated. He's getting greedier. Planning to push out more homeowners, seniors who can't fight back. He'll sell to developers for millions. My stomach churned. Predatory didn't cover it. Proof. She handed me a USB drive. Financials, emails, memos, everything. I took it. This'll bury them. I hope so, she said, then drove off. The next morning, I tossed the USB onto Tom's desk. What's this? He asked. The end of their empire, I said. He plugged it in, eyes widening as files loaded. Holy, this is dynamite. Bank transfers, fake fines, everything. Get it in the news, I said. Before Paul covers his tracks. Tom grinned. Done. That afternoon, while Tom worked the expose, I filed a lawsuit against the HOA, a criminal complaint for fraud, and an injunction to freeze their property deals. Paul's game was up. My turn now. The courthouse buzzed. Reporters, homeowners, onlookers packed in. The scandal had erupted, thanks to Tom's article. Paul Grayson, once untouchable, sat at the defendant's table, his smugness gone, replaced by panic. His high-priced lawyer whispered furiously, but Paul barely listened. His empire was collapsing. I sat calmly, flipping through notes. The USB was a gold mine. Emails detailing their scheme, bank records showing profits funneled to personal accounts. Paul had even joked about cleaning house and turning retirements into revenue. It was damning. The judge, Harold Vance, a no-nonsense type who despised fraud, took his seat. I'd faced him before. He'd tolerate no games. The HOA's lawyer tried downplaying it. Legal foreclosures, homeowner agreements, their right to enforce rules. But I was ready. I laid out the case, fabricated fines, ignored notices, rigged auctions. I showed emails of board members plotting, bank records of personal enrichment. Then I called Ellen Brooks. She took the stand, shaky but resolute. She explained how Paul ordered her to backdate fees and fake statements. Why come forward? I asked. She looked at Paul. I couldn't watch innocent people lose their homes. His lawyer objected, bias, but I wasn't done. Homeowner after homeowner testified, Mrs. Ellis on her shutter fines, the Wilsons on their ignored disputes. A picture of systemic abuse emerged. Then I called Paul. He walked up stiffly, arrogance fading. I started easy, his role, responsibilities, foreclosure process. He answered cautiously, framing himself as rule-bound. Then I read his emails aloud. Orders to get creative, with fines, mocking easy targets, bragging about profits. His face reddened. His lawyer cried context, but it was over. Mr. Grayson, I said, holding up financials. Why were sale proceeds transferred to an offshore account in your name? The room erupted. Gasps, murmurs, camera clicks. Paul stammered, gripping the stand. His lawyer demanded a recess, but Vance shut him down. Answer. Paul had nothing. The prosecution rested, and Vance recessed before ruling. I watched Paul whisper frantically to his lawyer. He knew he was done. Vance returned, silencing the room. The court finds the Pinewood HOA, under Paul Grayson's leadership, engaged in fraudulent practices, illegally foreclosing multiple homes, he said firmly. All such sales are nullified. This case is referred to the DA for criminal investigation. Reporters scribbled, homeowners cheered, Paul looked ill. His lawyer packed up, eyeing an appeal, but it wouldn't matter. Every stolen home was coming back. Justice was served. As the courtroom emptied, homeowners thanked me, Mrs. Ellis teary-eyed. Paul, pale and shaken, paused as he passed. This isn't over, he muttered. I smiled. Oh, it is. Paul left with his tail between his legs, but I knew he'd squirm. Men like him didn't vanish quietly. He'd appeal or pull some stunt. I stayed ahead. First, I ensured every affected homeowner got their property back, working with lawyers, filing papers, reversing sales. The Wilsons moved in that week. Mrs. Ellis planned her garden. Paul, meanwhile, sank. His accounts frozen, assets seized, DA closing in. His offshore cash sealed his fate. His lawyer bailed. He floundered alone. Then his mansion, the one built on stolen money, hit the auction block. Poetic justice. I sat front row at the quiet sale. Paul's glare burned as I bid. He knew my game and couldn't stop it. I won his house, his symbol of power, mine. He stormed up, furious. Think this is funny? I pocketed the deed. Hilarious. You ruined me. No, Paul, I said, stepping closer. You did that yourself. He trembled, speechless, powerless for once. I walked away victorious. The HOA dissolved. The neighborhood met, rejecting another HOA for a democratic system, volunteer committees, transparent funds. No more scams. I moved back home, reclaiming my space. Then Paul showed up, disheveled, begging to stay. I lost everything, he whined. I looked at him. Remember when you took my house? Said it wasn't your problem. His jaw tightened. Michael, come on, not my problem either. I shut the door. The air felt lighter now. No HOA notices, no fear. Kids biked, Mrs. Ellis's flowers bloomed. The Wilsons hung decorations. A group of neighbors, Tom, Ellen, the Wilsons, Mrs. Ellis, thanked me with a steakhouse gift card and a note signed by all. You gave us our homes back, Mrs. Ellis said. You fought too, I replied. They asked me to lead a new council. I declined. Equal say, no rulers, was safer. Across the street, Paul watched, hollowed out. I turned away. That night, we grilled, laughed, toasted to no HOAs. Tom smirked. This to make a book. I laughed. Write it. I'll take a signed copy. Justice won. I was home, for good.